we have got a treat today. It's going to be a heck of a time with a profound synthesis of magical and occult teachings, as well as an initiation into the alchemical opus. Our guest today has learned to integrate and apply hermetic and alchemical principles to awaken inner knowing, liberate the imagination, and live a mystical, creative, and truly inspired life. So buckle up, here we go.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another epic episode of the Hyper-Anomalous Esoteric Research Organization podcast, aka HEROparanormal, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain, just south of Area 51. My name is Ryan, the Hermetic Hammer of the airwaves, bringing you an unbelievable, deep, and inspiring episode tonight. On the episode, we have someone I've wanted to talk to for quite some time, Marlene Seven Bremner. She has written a stunner of a book. I mean, this is one that belongs on everybody's bookshelf. It is thick, it is vast, it is very well written, and goes into great account of many of the most important things on our planet. The title of the book is Hermetic Philosophy and Creative Alchemy, the Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, and the Journey Through the Seven Spheres. Marlene takes the reader on a hermetic journey through each of the 7 traditional planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, exploring their mythological, philosophical, alchemical, Kabbalistic, magical, astrological, and energetic natures, and offering meditative discourses that reach past the rational mind to speak directly to the intuitive soul. She relates the 7 planets to the esoteric anatomy of the human body, specifically the 7 chakras, and shows how the planets can offer understanding and experience of archetypal energies and patterns in the body, in one's life, and in the creative process, drawing on ancient Egyptian and Greek cosmogonies and essential Hermetic texts such as the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablet, and the Nag Hammadi. Marlene Seven Bremner offers a detailed understanding of Hermetic philosophy, the art of alchemy as a foundation for psycho-spiritual creative practice, offering examples from traditional alchemical art and her own intricate esoteric paintings. 7 examines the foundation principles of Hermeticism and alchemy and shows how these traditions are a direct means for accessing higher consciousness and true self-knowledge, or gnosis, as well as a way to extract the essence of one's own creative gifts. Before we get started, if you have not subscribed to HEROparanormal on YouTube, please do, and share on your social media. This will help break through the shadow ban and help the algorithm actually acknowledge what it is I'm trying to do. Although they will never, most likely, monetize my channel, this will at least get it out there so some people can see it. In addition, if you have not subscribed to HEROparanormal on Patreon, please do. There is a ton of content behind the paywall. Just go to Patreon, look up HEROparanormal, boom, there you go. You can also access it on Podbean at HEROparanormal.com. Like I said, just a ton of content behind the paywall. So yeah, check it out. Back to our guest, Marlene Seven Bremner. is a self-taught oil painter, writer, and teacher who has spent more than 20 years exploring esoteric and spiritual traditions, including Hermeticism, alchemy, surrealism, symbolism, tarot, psychology, magic, astrology, shamanism, and mythology. She developed her career as an artist in the Pacific Northwest and now spends her time painting and writing in the New Mexico desert. Through this book, in my opinion, there's a lot to be learned. She has a profound synthesis of magical and occult teachings, as well as an initiation into the alchemical opus. This book reveals how to integrate and apply Hermetic and alchemical principles to awaken inner knowing, liberate the imagination, and live a mystical, creative, and truly inspired life. Marlene Seven Bremner, welcome to the HEROparanormal podcast.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me on the show.
It is a pleasure, and I've really been excited to talk to you. I've been blown away by this amazing work that you have published. You've put so much time and effort into something that's important to me, and I think that the way you've done it is just neatly within your creative scope. And what I mean by that is, even though this is an audio-only podcast, I was stunned. I mean, the book is hefty, and I was stunned at the detail, and this book would be worth purchasing just for the art inside it. And that was kind of a bonus that I didn't expect. And I guess my question is, what got you down this path to create such a magical book, such an amazing work? Obviously, you put tons and tons of time and effort into this. What got you on this path to share this with the world?
Well, it's kind of a long path, but I think I was interested in spiritual ideas from a young age and in the esoteric and the occult from a young age. And this sort of led me into studying natural medicine and energy healing. So it was when I was studying energy medicine and specifically a form of body work called polarity therapy that I was introduced to Hermetic principles, the ideas of correspondence and how things within the microcosm of the human body relate to the cosmos, the macrocosm, and those relationships and how the elements work and function through the body. And I wanted to portray some of these ideas visually. And so as I was exploring esoteric anatomy and energy and these relationships between the above and the below, I was also exploring that through my creative process. And this also spurred an interest in alchemy. And so at the time I was diving deep into my alchemical studies, starting off with the psychological approach of Carl Jung, and then kind of diving deeper into reading some of the old texts myself and trying to understand them. And all through this, I was painting and applying different things that I was learning into my creative process and learning a lot and kind of observing different Hermetic principles at play, observing different alchemical processes unfolding, and just studying all of that and taking copious notes. And all of that just sort of eventually accrued into this book. But yeah, it was a very long process that unfolded over many years.
Wow. And it is something to behold. It's something that I'll just get it right out of the way. I think this belongs on everyone's bookshelf. And I love the fact that you go into so much detail and have so many of my favorite characters, especially Hermes. And it's I have a fascination with the trickster and the Hermetic path of self-initiation. And you really go down this in quite serious detail to the fact that it's obvious that you are knowledgeable internally of this. This is something that's had a profound effect on your life.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I don't think I would write something like this if I didn't have a personal experience with it, and that's really important to me, and also plays a factor in the art that I create. It's all through my personal experience, and a lot of that through the body, but also through the spirit and soul, and how these things are affecting me and transforming me. Definitely plays into it. So,
and
yeah.
Since Hermes is so well documented in this book in various accounts, there's so much myth surrounding Hermes. Is he a god? Is he a priest? A messenger? What are your impressions and experiences researching Hermes?
Well, yeah, there have been people who believed Hermes was a living being, a living man, and many others who believe Hermes is a god or a deity. And my personal thought on the matter is that Hermes represents the mind itself, the divine mind, and our access to these higher states of consciousness, and also our ability to access the unconscious. So Hermes is a part of us and facilitates communication between different levels of our being. And we all have access to Hermes. And so I believe there have been many people throughout the centuries who have channeled this energy, this divine energy, and even written under the pseudonym of Hermes. And the Hermetic texts are like that as well. They're ascribed to Hermes, but obviously they were written by, probably philosophers and different people in the Hellenistic era. But they were tapping into this field of energy that we think of as Hermes, or Hermes thrice greatest, this divine sage, the god of wisdom that helps us to connect with the divine source within us and, facilitate information between our conscious and our unconscious mind, and also between our earthly mortal selves and our immortal, celestial, eternal natures.
Oh, such truth. And I believe that, like so many things, when it comes to self-initiation and gnosis, people are very unwilling to kind of trust their own gut intuition or their own soul to guide them to these more, I guess, fringe paths. And in your experience, what advice do you have to someone who is, just kind of sniffing around the tree of knowledge when it comes to Hermes and following their own path? Any advice? I know the book goes into a lot of detail, but in a nutshell, what would you advise people?
Yeah, I think the intuition is a really important factor in that, and allowing yourself to be guided. But this kind of requires a cultivation of receptiveness and spaciousness within to be able to hear messages that are coming through. So, I think self-initiation is really about allowing that inner wisdom, that inner intelligence to guide us. And we have to get out of the way. We have to put our egos aside a little bit and allow that to happen. And there are different ways that we can cultivate that receptiveness, paying attention to dreams. Our unconscious is always communicating to us through dreams and has so many symbols and messages and things to teach us. So that's a very fundamental way to go on the path of self-initiation, is to pay attention to these things that are happening below the surface of our awareness. And it's through our dreams that those things come to the surface. And it's all expressed in metaphor and symbol and very occulted. So we have to kind of, follow these little breadcrumbs into the forest of our unconscious and figure out what they mean. And so that's part of it. But also, there's messages coming to us all the time through nature, through other people in our lives, through events that are unfolding. And if we pay attention to things like synchronicity and feelings that we get, and pay attention to our gut reactions to things, all of these things kind of help us steer in the direction of gnosis and of true self-knowledge. So those are some basic things just in terms of like following the intuition and cultivating that kind of receptivity. But yeah, then there's other things we can do, paying attention to the movements of the planets and astrology and, taking note of the planetary rulers of the day and kind of having a devotional practice aligned to the planets. That helps us get in touch with these 7 archetypal energies that are working through us, which also express in unconscious ways. And so the more familiar we can become with those through a sort of devotional, magical practice, the more we come to know ourselves. And that, again, is part of this gnosis, is coming to know these different aspects of.
Very sufficient and inspirational answer. Thank you. And, on a personal level, this is, for simplicity's sake, I find that it seems that when one delves into the occult arts and trying to gather one's innermost potential, that the outside world or reality, if you want to call it that, still has those moments. And I've dealt with that myself, where I'm knocked off of my own little pedestal that I've created for myself, and it's hard for me to gauge the relationship between the real and the more surreal. And yet, I would say that the more valuable things in my life are definitely sparked from, like these messages you're describing, the inspiration that comes from beyond the veil, and the planetary aspects of that are huge. And I think, in today's culture and society, we're taught that the planets are just these random rocks floating around that, just get in the way of NASA and their missions. But on a personal level, and more historically, they are much more than that, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So in the Hermetic cosmogony, we're talking about the 7 traditional planets. So the 7 planets that were visible to the naked eye. And technically, they're not all planets. So the sun and the moon are considered planets in this system, even though the sun is a star and the moon is orbiting the Earth. And so we've got the sun and the moon, and then Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And these are actually affecting us from the cosmos, but they're also within us. And this kind of goes with the Hermetic principle of correspondence, which says that everything that's above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. More commonly heard as above, so below. So these things are within us. They're not just existing in the cosmos out in space. They're actually inside of us, and they represent energies. And so as these planets are moving around the solar system and orbiting the sun and aspecting with each other and with the Earth and with our natal charts and all of this, it's affecting us in different ways and kind of triggering different reactions within us. And if we're kind of operating in an unconscious, automatic way in life, we're not really like engaging, then these things are just kind of having their way with us, and that's what we understand as fate. And so the Hermetic idea is that we overcome these 7 spheres, these 7 planetary spheres of fate, and we rise into a higher state of consciousness in which we have our own creative agency, and we come back into our power over destiny. And this doesn't mean that we have complete control over things or that, we're the rulers of the universe or something like that. It just means that we've stepped into a more active creative role with our destiny. And so we have more of the power to impact how things unfold, how we react to things. And that all happens through ascending to these different levels of consciousness, but also through fine-tuning the imagination and understanding how the imagination affects the outer world. But I wanted to go back to what you were saying about having a hard time kind of reconciling the outer world and the inner world. I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, kind of co-facilitating the two, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a product of of our culture, and in this time, everything being so dualistic, and the Hermetic path really teaches us how to dissolve those boundaries. And so one of the things that can happen is we start to observe what we consider consensus reality, or the waking world, or just reality. We start to observe that as though it were a dream itself. And that dream is unfolding within the mind of the Creator, the one source energy in which everything is unified. And so we're all part of this unfolding dream. And everything that occurs in our life, around us, and in the world is also part of that dream. And if we think of what happens when we become lucid in a dream, that's kind of what happens the more conscious we become in life. We have more control over things that are happening, and more creative power to affect things.
I like that, kind of taking control and disciplining the mind to work through it. And, you know, from a creative standpoint, I think that practically anyone who is an artist, which you are, an oil painter, knows that fundamental truth that there is sort of this divine spark, but I don't want to take it out of context, but this inspiration that can come from not only within, but it can come from outside of oneself. And I don't want to call it channeling, but I think that artists are automatically or somehow more in tune with the nature or the law of nature. Do you find that, or are there times that you find that in your art or in your writing?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think of that as the flow state, when you're completely focused, but you're not having to consciously deliberate over everything that you're doing, because there's this sort of energy that takes over. Like, it feels as though your hand is being guided. At least when I'm painting, this is what I feel. It feels as though my hand is being guided. I can kind of step aside and just let things unfold, and then some really surprising things can happen that feel like they're not coming from me. They're just coming through me. And that's a really, really magical experience. And, you know, athletes experience that state of flow, and I think anyone working in any sort of creative endeavor experiences that at different times. That doesn't mean it's always like that when I'm painting. Sometimes it's just the work of it, you know, and it's just the discipline of like, okay, I just have to do this part, and I know what I'm doing, and there's like maybe not a lot of conscious deliberation because the memory is in my body of how to do certain things, but that divine inspiration isn't necessarily coming through all the time. But the more that we can align our energy and get out of the way and kind of unify these different states of attraction and repulsion that we're constantly being, you know, pinning back and forth between, the more we can feel all of that energy and align ourselves between the above and the below, and kind of harmonizing these archetypal energies, the seven spheres, the more access we have to that creative sphere, which in the Hermetic system is called the Ogdoad, or the eighth sphere. And so it's this idea that all the seven are unified in this eighth sphere, and this is where we step into our true creative power. And that's why it's called the formative or the creative sphere. And it's in the system of these nested spheres moving outward from the Earth. The eighth sphere is outside of the seven planetary spheres, and it's the sphere of the six stars, or the sphere of souls. And beyond that, then we have the sphere of the divine mind in the ninth, and then the sphere of the source of all things, the 10th. And we have, this is sort of how consciousness rises up above these kind of energies that would hold us down closer to the earth and reaches towards its divine nature. And so the more we get out of the way, the more access we have to that divine inspiration that moves through us and kind of guides our creative work.
That is such a great explanation. And, kind of going into this, the reality of inspiration and, Thoth or Thoth and the ancient Egyptian roots of Hermetic tradition, which you write about in your book. You took a trip to Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. I wanted to ask you, obviously, Thoth was portrayed as, I believe, the one who invented writing. And what was your trip like? Was it what you expected, much more, different, inspirational in any sense?
It was definitely much more than I expected, and very, very inspirational and mind-opening. And Thoth definitely played a big part of that. I feel like Thoth is always with me. Thoth is the ibis-headed god of ancient Egypt, and yes, he was the god of writing, the god of magic and alchemy and astrology, engineering, mathematics. Like, all of these divine arts and sciences were ascribed to this ancient Egyptian deity named Thoth. And Thoth is a predecessor of Hermes, the syncretic form of Hermes, Hermes Trismegistus, who combined the Greek Hermes with the Egyptian Thoth. So, yeah, when I went to Egypt, one of the first things that hit me was just a sense of familiarity and a feeling of coming home. And the whole time I just felt like I was in a state of awe, and it was all very surreal. And in a lot of the temples, I had this sense of comfort and familiarity. No sort of memories or anything like that. I don't have past life recall, but it just felt like home, and like I didn't want to leave. And it was really neat to know that, Egypt is the birthplace of these Hermetic teachings, and to be able to look at some of the reliefs on the walls of the temples and kind of put some pieces together and see alchemical and Hermetic principles depicted through the Egyptian cosmology and mythology. So, yeah, that was a really interesting and enlightening thing to experience there. And I don't know, the trip really raised more questions than it answered. And I feel like this next leg of my journey is really going to be about unpacking that and going deeper into my understanding of Egyptian lore and cosmology, and, trying to put some more pieces together and go a little deeper with that.
Oh, that's great. That's on the bucket list. Something I haven't done yet, but I definitely want to incorporate in my life. And
oh, yeah,
it looks like it is, it's something better done sooner than later as the popularity increases. And
right.
Another aspect of your book, and a portion that I really liked, is where you delve into the three branches of Hermeticism: astrology, magic, and alchemy. And if you don't mind, I want to read just a quick sentence, which I thought was amazing. And that is, okay, that's a magician unaware of planetary and zodiacal timing, or at the very least the cycles of the moon, is ignoring one of the most important factors in conducting successful rituals. And this is so true, coming back to the reality, or our reality, the cosmology of it all, almost working like a finely tuned clock. Timing is everything, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And there's just so many levels of how precise you can get with that timing. From as basic as just, doing something in the hour of the planet on the planetary day, to really working out fine-tuned elections, where, all of the planets and the moon especially are in an optimal position for a specific purpose, for a specific magical ritual or talismanic purpose. So yeah, there's a lot of different levels of how precise you can be with that timing.
And in today's modern, it does seem like in today's modern society, this is something that is getting more and more ignored, where in the past, sailors, travelers alike would quite literally bet their lives and risk everything as far as from a navigational perspective on the stars. And they took it a lot more seriously, and these operations of the stars, the moon, the sun were taken far above what we consider them as just being menial in today's modern culture. How do we get back to operationally like including this in our lives, in your opinion?
That's a good question. Well, I think it all, starts individually and with the desire to learn and to understand, and just beginning to incorporate it with little things, like observing the cycles of the moon, and is the moon waxing or waning? And when it's waxing, it's the more generative time. When it's waning, it's more passive or contractive. So we can start to attune ourselves to those cycles. We can get in touch with the zodiacal signs and the different cycles unfolding throughout the year and the seasons. So there's little ways that we can start to get in touch with that. And not everybody needs to get into, electional magic. That can be pretty complicated, and it's not entirely necessary to go that deep with it, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But just getting in tune with cycles and the timing of the planets and kind of understanding what's going on in that cosmological clock can help us to put things into context that are happening in our lives and in the world around us, help us find meaning, and also help us to navigate energies that are unfolding in a more graceful way, So things might be happening according to that cosmological clock. There might be certain transits or things happening that are affecting us in a certain way. But the more conscious we are of that and how these things are unfolding, the more we can kind of play with that and get creative and find ways to move through that in a positive way,
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the detail you go into the cosmology. I don't want to stay on that topic the whole time, but it is definitely a feat that you've accomplished here with this book. Again, I highly recommend everybody get it. And before I forget, and I don't want to just cram this in at the end of the podcast, your artwork is something to behold. Can we tell listeners where they can view your artwork, purchase prints, and things of that nature?
Yeah, well, my website is a great place to go. That's just my name, so Marlene 7 Bremner.com, all spelled out. And there's a gallery of all my work and prints available of almost everything. And I'm not sure when the episode is going out, but everything's on sale at the moment until midnight tonight.
We'll get it out then, before then, for sure.
And let's see. I have an Instagram where I post things that I'm working on and my travels and other events and stuff like that. And that's just M7Artist. And Patreon. People can subscribe to my Patreon at 7art, all spelled out. And so lots of different ways to interact. But if you want to purchase prints or just peruse through the gallery, then the website's the place to go.
That is great. Thanks for doing that. And I also really like how you attack the concept of one and how basically universality, the heaven and earth component I'm a bit of a ufologist, and I'm interested in strange areas, and actually you live in one. You're in the land of enchantment, and in a recent conversation with somebody who had ties to intelligence in the Department of Defense, they were mentioning to me, that they said something very hermetic without really, I don't believe, wanting to or meaning to, but they said, they said, speaking of themselves, I believe God and Satan are one. And that sounded very hermetic to me because, for somebody that's more well versed in the occult and the esoteric, this is kind of a given, if you do deep research. But this was something that they had come across just through energy work, Kundalini yoga, and some other things, but the principle of oneness in the universe. And I find that is slowly but surely kind of permeating into all aspects of society where, that gray area is more readily accepted than straight positivity or straight negativity. Have you found that at all in your travels?
Yeah, I do see that happening, and I see people reflecting that truth and trying, I think people are wanting balance, and the Hermetic worldview does kind of provide a way of looking at things that is more fundamentally balanced, and that allows for things to be complex, and it allows for paradox, that, God and Satan are essentially the same thing because of this idea that everything is from a unified source. And so we perceive things in this reality as being so diametrically opposed and separate. There's hot and cold, and love and hate, and male and female, and all these polarities and opposites. But at the root of it all, everything is united in one form. So every opposite contains its opposite within it, the whole yin and yang idea. And I think people are wanting to find that middle ground, and that's really what the Hermetic teachings are all about, is finding that that unified, aligned path that doesn't see things as being so black and white.
Absolutely.
He energizes these things that are kind of pulling us in such disparate ways.
And it is funny how humans have that tendency, or it seems like limited capacity, to only see things as positive and negative. And that kind of brings me to another fundamental, interesting portion that you cover very well in your book, and that is the Trinity, which is basically, this third entity kind of incorporated to make it more palatable and provide balance. And do you think that was presented in many spiritual and religious traditions, including Gnosticism, for that palatability, just for people to, or is there more to it?
I think it is actually a reflection of the energy of the universe. That it's not just positive and negative, it's positive, negative, and neutral. So we need that neutral pole for the positive and negative energies to interact around. And so there we have the Trinity just in electromagnetics, but this gets expressed in different ways in different religions. So in the Vedic system, there's the active Rajasic force and the passive Tamasic force, and then the Sattvic neutral or balanced force that ties them together. And in alchemy, we have Mercury, which is that neutral principle that ties together the sulfur, or the soul, and the salt, the body. So we see these three principles being expressed that just convey to us the nature of energy itself. There's expansive energy and contractive energy, and then there's neutral energy that is just pure stillness. And it's in that stillness that we're able to connect these two parts of ourselves that are moving between contractive and expansive phases. And I like to think of, the infinity symbol a lot, because so the infinity symbol we can think of as the number 8, which is ascribed to Mercury, and it's this continuous flow between these two states of being, and at the center we have that still point. So I like to meditate on this symbol a lot as a way to, kind of tune into that still point and say, okay, yes, there's expansion and contraction, but to root myself into that stillness in the center. But also to embrace when things are expanding and when things are contracting, and to be able to observe and not fight against it,
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe it. And it is present, it seems, in all energy and even electricity, with a positive and negative and no ground, you're kind of asking for trouble. And, the Trinity, I think it's important for listeners to know, and you document this in your book quite well, that the Trinity is described in the sacred sermon of Hermes. And I find that amazing, just how much was here before many of mainstream religions kind of picked and choose and got what they wanted, whatever would help them in their assimilation of like the residents in whatever area they were in. But the Trinity is described as God, the Godhead, and the godly nature. And I think that that's a great way of description of the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
And we find this in a lot of other cultures as well, Eastern cultures. And you pull from a wide variety of codices. How did you decide how to get this all together? Because it's pretty fascinating. It would be a lot of work just pulling from one or two, but you really go all in with this and try to incorporate as much as you can.
I think that's just kind of my general approach to life when I'm interested in a subject, and I kind of want to see it from as many angles as I can, and sort of, that gets into comparative mythology and stuff, and I'm always looking for patterns and connections between things, and that's kind of just how I approach the world in general, is kind of with an eye for those patterns and connections. And so when I was researching the book, that's also how that was unfolding for me, was, okay, well, what does this look like in this context or in this other culture, and what other sources discuss this topic, and kind of trying to get a holistic perspective through looking at many different sources for things. So, yeah.
Very well done. And it flows so well in the book. It really does. And I also really appreciate the fact that you bring in the chakras and the human body and how energy flows through that. I really appreciated that. Could you tell listeners a little bit about the human chakras and how this relates to the Hermetic principles?
Mm-hmm. So the chakras are based on the caduceus, which is the staff of Hermes. And it's interesting that, the Vedic tradition has their own very similar understanding of the human esoteric anatomy, and that this relates to the ancient Egyptian symbol of serpents entwining around a staff. Anyway, there's a central channel, and around this central channel that runs up the spinal column, there are these two serpentine-like energies that interweave as they move up around this channel. And where they overlap, where they cross over, this is where these chakras or energy centers are formed. And there's 7 of these, starting at the perineum, or the base of the spine, and moving all the way up to the crown of the head. And they regulate energy moving into and out of the body, and function primarily through the nervous system and the endocrine system. So facilitating messages to the brain and through the hormones, and affecting the bodily organs in that way. So each one deals with different bodily functions, different organs. Each one aligns with a different element, with a different planet. So with the root chakra, we've got Saturn and the elements of Earth, and everything having to do with our physicality, our elimination system, our sexuality, survival, instincts. And then, I don't know if I want to get into all of them, but for another example, we've got the heart chakra, which is ruled by Venus, and this regulates the heart and the lungs and the circulatory system, and relates to our sense of compassion and ability to love others and love ourselves. All issues pertaining to the heart and to feeling and to the air element, to breath, the vital breath of life. And then Mercury in the throat, which relates to the fifth element, which is ether, and to our speech and communication and ability to hear and receive information coming in, to sound in general, and to expressing ourselves clearly and eloquently, and being able to communicate with other people, to invoke magical words of power. All of this is related to Mercury in the throat chakra. And this is also in the Vedic system. It's named Vishuddha, and it's thought of as like a filter. So it's kind of filtering energy between the above and the below. And if we think of that in the neck, we've got this narrow channel between the upper chakras in the head and the lower chakras, which relate to the four elements of earth, fire, water, and air. And then the upper chakras are more ethereal. So the throat kind of connects the upper and the lower, just like Mercury connects the conscious and the unconscious, or heaven and the underworld, and helps us to facilitate communication and movement between these parts of ourselves. And then in the head, we've got the sun and the moon. So the moon ruling the third eye, which is in the center of the forehead, and the sun rules the crown, so the highest point within the human energy system. And these two, sun and moon, represent the quintessential opposites within us, the father and the mother, the king and the queen. And when we're able to align these different serpentine energies, which represent the passive and the active within us, they culminate in the bridal chamber of the brain, where the third eye is. And this sort of love affair between the sun and the moon takes place, where they can act in harmony. And so that's that full harmonization of the opposites within us, in the sun and the moon. And this relates to, the Kundalini rising, which is also thought of as a serpentine energy sleeping at the base of the spine, and awakening consciousness. It relates to enlightenment or gnosis, and just the full realization of truth and of the self and of divine wisdom within us. And all of this is happening energetically in the body as these energies become aligned and awakened and guided upward in their ascent. So that's a little bit about the chakras. I don't know, do you have any other specific questions?
It's such a good explanation and such a great realization of the chakra's importance with energy and kind of with oneness, again, universalism. And I think, in this age of separation, that it kind of brings me back to, the universality of everything, and I am that I am, that common English translation of the Hebrew phrase, which may mean I will become what I choose to become, and I will be that I will be, or I create what I create, or I am the existing one, and the connection to the divine mind. I just think that's so well explained, that we are, inside of us is the same as outside of us. So we are the universe. And a line in your book, which is absolutely amazing, is when it comes to, I believe it's under the creative sphere, and that is the unawakened mind from pure forgetfulness, unaware of their formative powers, is creating unconsciously, but with gnosis. There is nothing left to do but sing praise in silence. And I love that, almost as if when you do find out how it all works, all you can really do is be a little more quiet about things, and not as not be screaming the entire process from the mountaintops. And that's so true. And let's get to something else that I know is pretty amazing, and kind of delve into the darkness a little bit of Saturn. And have you delved into Saturn significantly? Is this something that has had input into your creativity and affected you in a positive way?
Oh, Saturn, my old friend. Yes. Saturn and I are very well acquainted. And I feel like I have a deep love and appreciation for Saturnian energy through my experiences with it. It's definitely not an easy energy to deal with all the time. So Saturn relates to, as I was saying before, the root chakra, the earth element, and things that have to do with our physical survival. But also in alchemy, it relates to the metal lead, which is like the densest and heaviest of all the metals, and the most difficult to transmute. And this sort of heaviness in a sense of inertia and constriction, contraction, and limitation. And it can feel really like such a burden sometimes when Saturnian energy is very strong for us. And in alchemy, Saturn is actually placed right at the beginning of the alchemical great work, assigned to the process or the initial stage of the alchemical work known as the nigredo, or the blackening. And, it's said that when you see your matter going black, you're at the beginning of the work. So it's a very important part of the alchemical process and of the creative process as well, the necessary darkness that we have to go into for generation to occur. So it's also said there's no generation without putrefaction, and so this idea that we have to allow things to break down and decay in order for new growth to happen. And so in life, and for me, this can happen in like really big ways where you really feel like you're in this dark night of the soul and like going through a hell realm and just like trying to stay afloat. And it can be a very challenging time in life, maybe when we feel like we've hit rock bottom and there's nowhere else to go, And there's something that happens when we surrender to that, and we kind of, we just let go and say, okay, yeah, I'm here, and this is happening, and I'm just going to trust that it's happening for a reason. There's something that happens where it does begin to transform. And so I've had many different phases of this in my life. We can call it melancholia or depression or just, going through a hard time. And the more that I go through it and the more that I just trust that it's a transforming process that's happening, the easier it is to navigate and the faster it actually does transform. So, I've had it where it lasted years, and then, even just within the last week, I had a few days where I was going through it, and I've come to really actually embrace it and almost enjoy it in this kind of strange way, where limitation will kind of come upon me, and I'll just say, okay, well, this is what I've got to deal with, and how can I get creative within these bounds of limitation? Like, what can I do? And then some amazing things end up happening, and I find a sense of freedom in limitation that is actually really profound to me. So yeah, that's a little bit about my experience with Saturn, and I definitely have a deep respect for Saturn.
Yeah, I really appreciate that answer, because that I think that's so important. It's to be with that rhythm or with that flow when it's where it is what it is, and reflecting on that and kind of understanding that it's momentary, right? That is a huge leap and difficult for people to do. Usually people prefer to fight these negatively charged moments of emotion and such, but in reality, if we go with the flow, it reminds me a lot of yoga, and I don't want to sound cheesy, but if you go with the flow, it's not only a simplified mode, but it brings me to something you mentioned, which is Saturn being equated to lead and the process of transmutation, turning lead into gold. And I know that oftentimes people unfortunately believe that to be what it is at face value, but more likely in the alchemical process, it's exactly what you mentioned, where it is more important in the great work or in the alchemical process to transform those difficult, rough moments into better times. And, without that darkness and suffering, how would we know what a better time even is, right?
Yeah, we need that perspective. And everything is moving through these phases of growth and decline, expansion and contraction. We see this through the seasons of the year, and this is happening to us all the time. So it's important to acknowledge that when it's happening and not just to fight it off or ignore it, or also not to identify with it and get stuck in it, but to just see it as a process that's unfolding, and also to understand that in that darkness, there is a richness there, and that's where the Philosopher's Stone is. That's where it's hidden. It's in the darkness within us. And so being open to that and willing to face it can really unfold a beautiful process of self-discovery.
I couldn't agree more. And you go into so much detail with all the planets. I loved your section on Jupiter. We could discuss that forever. But for the sake of time, something that I do want to touch on is Mars, because in these more modern times, we're seeing so much mainstream media about Mars. With the Elon Musk narrative of creating a community there. Do you find that this is being done for other reasons, or do you think that there is an esoteric backbone to some of this that we're seeing in more mainstream narratives?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, yeah, it's fascinating, right, that Mars is the planet we're all trying to get to, meanwhile we're destroying our planet, and through this very kind of like heated Martian process of global warming, and now we want to go to the planet of fire and make residence there. That's very interesting. And also, thinking of Mars as possibly having had water on it before, and like, where did it go? And the future of Earth, if things continue, like, is Earth going to become another planet like Mars? These are just some of the things that I think about sometimes, but also, like, humanity is still such a warring species, so it kind of makes sense that we would want to go to Mars, the planet of war and aggression and rage. But maybe that's part of some sort of healing process that we're going through, reconciling with that part of ourselves. I don't know.
I like that. And, you go into so much detail about the sun, which is something that I think you named the essence of eternity, which was such a good name for that chapter. And you show the eye of the sun, obviously, the eye of Horus. Can you explain the realization that can come from basically, I don't want to say sun worship, but understanding the sun and its importance in the entire cosmology of everything?
Well, in the Hermetic cosmology, the sun is the dispenser of light, and it connects us with the divine source of all things. Whether you want to call it God or the Creator, the Supreme or the One, it's through the sun that those divine rays are emanating, and through the rays of the sun. And so sun worship is, in a sense, connecting with that divine source that's moving through the sun. And everything within our solar system, all of these planets revolving around the sun, corresponds in turn with the 7 chakras within us, ruled by those planets, and how they're all aligned and unified by the sun. So the sun, the white light of the sun actually contains all the 7 rays of the spectrum, and so in a sense all of those planets are unified by the sun. And the sun is described as a charioteer, and so the charioteer has the reins of all the 7 in his hands, and he's able to guide them. And this is sort of what happens when we can align with that highest, most exalted part of ourselves that the sun expresses. That's also expressed through the metal gold, and the perfection of metal gold in alchemy, and the transmutation of these other metals into this most exalted form of gold. And on another level, the cycles of the sun and the seasons, and the different myths of like dying and resurrected gods, like Osiris and Dumuzi, and the rebirth of the sun that happens with the winter solstice, and kind of tapping into that mythological aspect helps us to get in touch with our sense of what's eternal within us, and that through life we're constantly going through these deaths and transformations, and then at the end of our life we die and then we transform again. But if we align and identify with this solar aspect, we can get in touch with that eternal essence that we actually are, and that we might be changing and transforming all the time, dying and being reborn, but our essential nature is always the same, and that's that eternal core of what we actually are and who we actually are.
Brilliant. You're so knowledgeable on this subject matter. I could talk to you forever, it seems. But let's, as we kind of wrap up here, I think it's very important to let our listeners know that this is a very important, and in my opinion, necessary book on everyone's bookshelf. Let's once again remind them where they can purchase the book, and before the sale is over, where they can purchase your art.
Yes. Well, the book, if you go to my website, marlene7bremner.com, and maybe you can have the link to that on the show notes, you will see links to the book. It's available widely, like on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles, and you can purchase it from Inner Traditions and several other booksellers as well. So all those links are there on my homepage. And there's also a link to the pre-order for my second book, which comes out in July of this year. And that one follows up on the first book and goes a little deeper into the alchemy and art side of things. And let's see here. What was the other question?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yes, your artwork as well.
Oh, yeah, so same place. My website, go to the Prince tab, and everything is there that's available for purchase. Lots of different sizes and lots to choose from. So, yeah. And if you want to subscribe to Patreon, again, that's patreon.com/7art. And there's different tiers that you can subscribe at, starting at $1 a month, which gives you access to the blog. And that goes back for years and will give you a glimpse inside of my thinking process and creative process, and then different tiers from there with rewards at different levels. So those are some of the ways to find me and to interact. And yeah, Facebook and Instagram, Marlene Seven Bremner, you can find me.
Such an important book. Can't wait for your next one. I really love the way you take these mysterious things and kind of shed a lot of light on them and connect them. And I think that a lot of people could gain a lot of comfort by reading this book. There's a lot of amazing stuff in its teachings, and I wish you the best. Thank you so much for coming on, Marlene.
Oh, thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. A lot of fun. Thank you.
There it is. Man, what a book. What a great author. The book is Hermetic Philosophy and Creative Alchemy, The Emerald Tablet, The Corpus Hermeticum, and The Journey Through the Seven Spheres by Marlene Seven Bremner. Pick up a copy and definitely check out her website, marlene7bremner.com. The artwork is indescribable, and unique and beautiful. Highly recommend purchasing prints of that as well. She has really offered something to readers with this book. It's very well written, very well researched, and obviously approached by personal experience. She illuminates the alchemical arts, explaining much of the history surrounding Hermetic philosophy, cosmology, and practice. So go to her website, grab a copy of the book, and get initiated into the reality of the great work. Get your mind blown. It's a great book, worth every penny. Also worth every penny, check out HEROparanormal at Patreon. There's a ton of content behind the paywall. Please subscribe. Subscribe to HEROparanormal on YouTube and share on your social media, and follow us on social media at HEROparanormal. Also go to HEROparanormal.com on Podbean. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off.